Welcome to another episode of the Silmarillion Sessions. We're your hosts, Dr. Mikhail Thompson and Mr. William Lassiter. And today we are looking at the unrest of the Noldor, the actual fashioning of the Silmarils, and the becoming unrestful of the Noldor elves, which is a very interesting thing. I think just to take it right from the title, the previous chapter was the unchaining of Melkor. And we got introduced to the character of Feanor, and Melkor is loosed from Tartarus, basically. And we know about his secret hatred, and we know about Feanor's sort of his fatal flaw, right? He doesn't do anything bad at that point. He just has this fatal flaw that is he's a bit of a short temper and very passionate. And all that. Also, incidentally, it's also the source of his genius in being able to craft many things, including perhaps the Palantir, but most importantly for our purposes today here, the Silmarils, and that kind of leaves us with that, and it's the unchaining of Melkor, and immediately followed by the unrest of the Noldor. It's not restlessness, but it's unrest, right? This inquietude, and in this chapter, we see why that comes about. And although at the beginning, and I think it's important to set out sort of these moments as we go, the beginning sets up the creation of the Silmarils, how Feanor did it, or at least what we know and what we don't know about the Silmarils. The narration is very clear on that. The narrative is very clear on that. It goes into detail about these precious artifacts, these mystical items. And that Melkor starts to lust after them. But it's not the Silmarils themselves initially that actually spark the unrest of the Noldor. And I thought that was very interesting. It's rather the lies of Melkor. Melkor starts just insinuating, dripping fake news here and there among the Noldor. And they start to listen, few of them start to listen to him, and then they repeat it, and it grows like a bad rumor. Yeah, and that's what really sparks it off. So it's not even a perverse love of the beautiful so much as the fact that they lend their ear to the evil one, just with malicious whisperings and gossip about this, that, or the other thing, that eventually builds and leads to fratricide, genocide, attempted genocide, and ultimately self-exile. Really proud, arrogant self-exile on the part of the Noldor, and pretty much the wholesale destruction of anything good among the elves for the next couple thousand years. But why don't we just start with talking about the perhaps the Silmarils themselves, and understanding that. And I wanted to start with a bit from the text that I thought was very, very interesting. It's not only we know that the Silmarils capture the light of the trees and somehow preserve these things, but we're told that the Silmarils, for those who don't know, three great jewels, right? But we're told not until the very end of time, after the sun passes and the moon fails, shall it be known what substance they were made of. It says they were like diamonds, like gems, like crystal, but the crystal was to the Silmarils as a body, a fleshy body, is to the children of Ilúvatar, that is elves and men. That it housed an inner fire, so it had a soul. It was some sort of hylomorphic entity, a body-soul composite thing, something that actually has a spiritual dimension. Somehow, he was able to create, I suppose you could say it's somehow animated. I mean, in some way, like there's this very strange sense that they were as though they were living things.
Yeah.
Which means it's a new category. It's not really artifact. It's not, it doesn't pass the animal, vegetable, mineral test. It's kind of somewhere in between. But the other interesting aspect of that is the prophecy, because this is an elvish work of literature, the prophecy that Feanor will awake again at the end of time. So here we've got sort of this once and future king, or the sleeping king motif that we see in a lot of fairy stories there. What does it say specifically? Not until when Feanor shall return, who perished before the sun was made, who now sits in the halls of awaiting, and comes no
Hmm.
more among his kin. So there's this kind of foreshadowing. Then, I mean, the question raised to me is it just Feanor who comes back? Is there a general resurrection of the elves? Because that all of a sudden really shifts our expectation, our story. I think that we assume about the parting of the elves from Middle Earth and so on. But the Silmarils, what are they made of? We don't know. How is it somehow that they have this power?
Yeah. I mean, that whole thing about Feanor coming back, he capitalizes in my text end, the end. And that's the
Yes.
dagger laugh, the last battle and the cataclysm like Ragnarok that happens. And then I guess Feanor's going to come back after that, or maybe at that time or something like that. But one of the questions that comes up, considering what Feanor does, you got to wonder, do you want this guy to come back? Is that the kind of guy you really want to come back? I mean, Arthur, it's obviously a comparison to Arthur, right? The once and future
Right.
king, as you pointed out.
Absolutely.
But Arthur, he makes mistakes. It's true. I mean, he has this thing with his aunt that conceives Mordred, and he
Yeah.
puts a lot of babies into a boat to drown them in order to get rid of anybody who's challenging to him. And aside from that, aside from being a
We
mass
all make
murderer of
mistakes.
children, we all make mistakes. But at heart, Arthur is not. He doesn't have this sort of this angry spirit in him. He doesn't really
Mm.
have the things that Feanor encourages his people to do. I mean, not to let the cat out of the bag, but Feanor encourages his people to go to war with Melkor and to basically leave the blessed lands and betray their kindred. That's pretty harsh. He makes an oath that he will follow Melkor to get the Silmarils back, no matter what, which is a very strong oath. And
Exactly.
it's different than what Arthur does, where Arthur says, "Let's all get together and find the Grail, pursue the Grail." It's a different thing.
Hmm.
So, I mean, if I had to choose between Arthur and Fëanor, I'd probably choose Arthur.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Does this end up making bookends around the whole story of Middle Earth? That this is the guy who kind of began the
I mean, he
war as we know it?
precedes the sun. You know, what's interesting
Maybe.
though too. So well, he was doing his thing. He made the Silmarils before the sun was made. So that I think would drive home the gravity of what he did. I don't mean like evil. I mean this is a major figure. I mean, he's semi-divine kinds
Yeah.
of actions. He makes these gems, and they were as though they were living things, and they shine like the stars of Varda.
Yes.
That is in Sindarin. That's the old Elvish. In the Sindarin tongue, that is Elbereth Gathoniel, right? That's Elbereth.
Yeah.
So they shine like the stars of Elbereth. So he basically made stars. Like he makes
Yeah.
these stars that somehow can be, I guess, pocketed, right? And but he's a
Uh,
maker of stars, and when we understand what is a star is a god, right? That's the heavenly bodies, stars, constellations, the planets, and later the sun and moon get invented. But these are things that in our world and in Middle Earth, these are gods of some sort.
so again,
Even,
doesn't it raise that question though? Then that is Fëanor doing a good thing when he makes the Silmarils? I mean, they're beautiful, sure, but isn't
beautiful.
he
They're
in a
made
way he's capturing the
yeah.
spirit of a god?
Is yeah. What is he? And it seems that it's not somehow making a god. But I mean, it does. It's not that they are stars; they're like stars. So it is like he's got some sort of godlike power to make these things. Now we should immediately see, I think, with all this, especially to the allusion of in the ending of the last chapter, to his wife and how he stops listening to his wife. He stops
Yes.
telling his wife these things.
Yeah,
Bad.
bad
Don't
move.
ever do that. You start to
Yeah,
strange bad
bad
things
move.
happen.
Word of the wise.
But we should immediately see back to Aule and Yavanna, right? Aule did the same kind of thing. He made life. He made these little clay puppets. He was going to play
Yeah.
with it. I thought it was really cool to be like Dad, be like Iluvatar. And he kind of did it in secret on the slide. Didn't tell Yavanna about it because he knew she wouldn't approve. But he's down in the basement tinkering with this stuff. And then Iluvatar shows up and he
Uh,
repents. He immediately turns around and says, "I'm so sorry, I'll destroy them." Iluvatar's like, "No, don't worry about it. Like I get it. They just have to wait." And so now that's what plays out at the level of the Valar, at the level of the gods, of the angels, the
yeah.
heavenly power. And now we see that
Yeah.
same dynamic play out with Feanor, but instead of Iluvatar showing up and Feanor saying, "Oh, I'm sorry," he closes himself off more,
Right.
and he starts to when Melkor contrives to steal one of the Silmarils, he just swears vengeance on it, and it's all him initiated, and he
Yeah. This
cuts
is
himself off
right.
progressively, cuts himself off severely, more and more from other beings within his own tribe,
Yeah.
with other tribes within the Noldor, from between the Noldor and the other elves, cuts himself off. And he cuts himself off from the Valar, cuts all the Noldor off from the Valar as they refuse to repent, and they go off in vengeance against Melkor as though they are equal to the gods. And I think
Mm.
that's where that there's that kind of fall more than in the creating the Silmarils. It's in this hubris.
Yes. Yes, it is. And in some ways, it's like the hubris that we see in the beginning, which is part of the creation, really takes that turn for the dark when he cuts himself off from everybody, including his wife, Nerdanel. I mean, she could. Where was she in all that when later on, when he makes the oath or when he decides to pursue Melkor? Is she there supporting him? Is she there saying, this is a really bad idea. I'm staying here.
Mm-hmm.
We don't really see a great deal of her counsel after he makes that decision because he's totally on his own. And really, I think Tolkien he's latching on to something which is very dangerous in the human psyche, which is to be so convinced of your cause that you end up cutting yourself off from all human contact. You're either with
Mm-hmm.
us or against us, sort of thing.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm reflecting on that whole secret, the word secret that he uses here when he says he began a long and secret labor. Why? Why is it secret? Why doesn't he do it in the open? Why doesn't he, like you said, down in the basement tinkering with things? Yeah, it's a great image. Why isn't he out there being like, hey, Iluvatar, fellow Valar, I want to make these things. What do you think? Is this a good idea? He doesn't do that. He doesn't do that. He's
Mm-hmm.
not saying, I'm making a beautiful thing. Why don't you all come and see? It's none of that. It's just this sort of like, as you said, tinkering down here and summoning his power. He does it all in secret. And then later on, he has that secret turning in his heart against Melkor that he makes public later. And then it's secretive. It's dark.
Mm-hmm.
It's cut away from everybody else. Much like what happens later with Sauron, the making of the ring, making it in secret.
Yes. And Saruman even too,
Yep, and Saruman. Yep, yep,
going down just down the chain. No,
yep.
that's really very interesting. And in case we start to think that, well, maybe the Silmarils are bad, they are blessed by the Valar. They're made holy.
Yeah,
The Varda herself hallowed the Silmarils, we're
yeah.
told.
They're not. Yeah, they're not bad. No,
No.
but
And it's that secretiveness. It's you've done a good thing, and now it's complicated, like all good art.
yeah, yeah,
It can be turned to evil.
yeah.
Or evil can come even from good in a broken and fallen world. And I think you're
Hmm.
right that this whole being really just so bound up with your cause, you get causism instead of actual, living like you're supposed to. And bad things flow from that.
Yes,
Bad things
and
flow from that.
your cause could be your art. I mean,
Right.
there's so many stories of great artists whose lives were just a complete ruin. Pablo Picasso, he was modernist, but he was a great artist. But
Right.
man, he was a son of a biscuit to women, like horrible guy. Paul Gauguin, another example of the same thing.
Again.
Uh,
Yeah.
uh, Monet,
Absolutely.
you
Dissolute.
know,
Yeah.
all of these guys, even certain composers. I mean, I think of uh, uh, Charlie Bird Parker. His life
Mm-hmm.
was kind of a wreck and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And even Ludwig van Beethoven. That guy wasn't like a cheerful, out in the open, giving to charity all the time type of guy.
Not so much. No,
So what is that?
it's not to say that everybody is, because you do have great people like Bernini, lived a pretty good life, simple, pious
Yep,
guy.
Johann
Johannes
Sebastian Bach.
Bach.
Yeah,
Um, you've got these great examples of that too. So it's there's a um, a myth that artist types are all sort of dissolute,
Right.
decadence, but that's not the case. But it's like when they're good, they're really good, and when they're bad, it's just they really go sour.
They got the curl on their forehead, right in the middle of the forehead, like that, the poem.
Right.
Um, is it possible? Is it possible that what Tolkien is getting at is something latent in the nature of the artistic mind? In other words, this is the danger or the pitfall that even a good artist has to be aware of. Because
Hmm.
he says here, he summoned all his lore and his power and his subtle skill, which is what you do when you make art.
Hmm.
And at the end of all, he made the Silmarils, which was a fantastic thing to do. But all of it is done in secret, not out in the open.
Right.
And maybe he's getting at this idea that when you do great art, you're summoning a tremendous power. You're tapping into something maybe that's beyond you almost.
That's a really interesting thing. You're summoning a tremendous power, and I think so. You are. I think that's true. And there's a double meaning. I mean, Kenneth Branagh in my head. There's a double meaning in that. Is that
Right.
when it's much to do about nothing for those of you who are uninitiated. The summoning, you're doing a great work, and that summons a greater power. You're summoning a greater power to do that work. On the one hand, you're kind of tapping into the divine mind or something. The other hand, when you do that, you kind of make yourself a lightning rod for greater
Ah,
powers that can be,
yes.
well, let's just say at least perilous, even if not evil. I mean, we've got the various mythologies. Um, you have somebody doing a great thing, and they get in touch with fairy, or they summon it ultimately a benevolent being, but they're burned up by holiness or something. Essentially, like you touch the ark. The ark is a great thing, but you touch the ark and then you zap dead because it's a high voltage container or something. Uh,
Yes.
and here he did a great thing, and Melkor is drawn to this act. Melkor is lusts after the silver. He made a thing that Melkor himself lusts after.
Yeah, and Malcolm
Similar,
couldn't make.
yeah,
Malcolm
Melkor
couldn't do it.
himself couldn't even make something like this. And similarly, the dwarves. So it was maybe a more accessible thing is the dwarves did cool stuff and make great things. Their toy market of Dale was the wonder of the world, and then the dragon came. It's like
Yeah.
it was the very wealth and glory and splendor, good things in themselves. But now you're playing with the big boys, and when
Yes.
you have wealth and glory and splendor, you get the dragons. There's the risk of the dragon coming, and that's
Yeah.
at perhaps a more accessible level for us. People can read the Hobbit and see that. But I think that's a similar thing to what we have here. Is you're
Hmm.
putting forth
Hmm.
all your subtlety, all your power, all your mind, and that, I don't know, does that become sort of like a mana vortex or something? You kind of pull in higher powers that all of a sudden now you're in a perilous position. I mean, I think that's something that Tolkien, as a scholar of fairy stories, um, is very aware and writes about the perilous.
Yeah.
He and Jack, what's his Lewis, likewise, they're aware, they write a little bit about this. I think Tolkien goes a little bit more in depth with the nature of peril and the perilous. When you step into
Yeah.
fairy, it's a wondrous place, but it could destroy you.
Yes.
Not
Yes.
necessarily even the things that are intrinsically evil, but the things that are just at a higher metaphysical level than what your form is capable of interacting with.
It is not wise to meddle in the affairs of wizards.
Exactly.
Yeah. And the contrast that Tolkien sets up in Lord of the Rings is between this community of people, hobbits, who are about as small and backwater as you can imagine. And they
Yeah.
don't get involved in those affairs of wizards. And when they do, it is
Hmm.
extremely perilous. It's
Hmm.
facing the Nazgul, or it's confronting the Dark Lord himself. It's really quite tremendous. There's that great
Yeah.
scene in Lord where Frodo is on the hill of seeing. Amon Sul, I think it is,
Yes,
and
that's right.
he feels that
I'm on hand.
eye. Amon Hen, that's right, and he feels that eye looking for him, and it's getting closer and closer, and he takes off the ring right at the last minute, and the eye like passes over him, right?
Right.
Why? Because he had on this tremendous object, this objet d'art, and
Right.
he hadn't made it, but nevertheless, it drew the power to him. I would probably suggest that 99.9% of the time, if you do great art, you're going to attract, if nothing else, the solicitors, you know, uh, which are bad enough. But I mean, yeah, I think that the anybody who does this is going to fall, and it can be crushing, I think, to somebody who is a sensitive artistic spirit. I think of somebody like Nick Drake, the great guitar player and
Yeah.
composer of the 1970s, and he was phenomenal talent, but he just couldn't handle it. He couldn't stand the whole world of music making and the leeches that are involved therein and the powers that came to him because of this thing. And he took his own
Hmm.
life. My own uncle Virgil LaQuire, who was a concert pianist, he ran the circuit there in the South and played classical piano. It
Yeah.
just about broke his back. I mean, he became a chronic alcoholic, and he finally
Oh.
had to choose between his family and his art.
Yeah.
After a very bad incident, he had to choose, and he chose his family, thank God, and gave up the art. But he was so good that he had constantly people that were trying to give him this, give him that, attracting powers to him, I guess you could say. Um, Elvis Presley and the Colonel. Elvis
Hmm.
Presley, for instance, was such a fantastic R&B blues singer. He attracted powers to him, including this guy called the Colonel, who just supplied him with drugs until he died, on the toilet of an overdose. It's amazing to me to think about that you draw to you powers that want to leech off whatever it is you're doing, and the art ceases to be art. It becomes something else. It's a cause celeb, um,
Yeah.
something that
And
makes you less than human.
yeah, there's an interesting thing that often comes along then too with with technique and art, great art, is that it seems this particularly prone to suspicion and
Mm.
jealousy. Likewise, I think of what great wealth, the ability to become the inclination to become suspicious of others. I mean, that's the nature of the lies that Melkor spreads among the Noldor too.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, so it's once the Silmarils are made, there's no hiding it. Right there, they radiant, and Feanor's pretty proud of it. Everybody's wondering at these things, but it's interesting that Melkor uses, and here a person could almost begin to feel sympathy with some of the fallen angels here. If you think,
Mm.
how does Lucifer, not just himself, kind of get jaded and decide he's going to turn against everything good, but how does he lead the other angels astray, these other
Mm.
celestial powers astray? He's got to convince them somehow that human beings are bad, right? It's a threat or whatever, and that's as we see Melkor doing here. Is he says, okay, the elves don't know much about man yet, so he can start to spread lies that Manwë is holding the man captive, and excuse me, that Manwë is holding the elves captive, so that the men can populate the earth and supplant the elves. So
Mm.
little do you know, the gods are conspiring against you to supplant you with these other lesser beings, which essentially has kind of been Melkor's fear about the elves, right? And he's not wrong in that in
Yes,
some
right.
anyway.
Yeah.
But he tries to now spread that suspicion as a lie among the Noldor, saying, "Hey, the gods are holding you captive, and the Valar are gonna, because they can have better control of this mortal, weaker being, this race of weak beings that are prone to death. They'll be able to control them better, and so they're gonna get rid of you guys pretty soon, especially
Yeah.
now that they see you do."
Yeah.
The Noldor believed, or even half believed, the evil words.
Half believe. Yeah, because that
Half.
half belief
It's
gnaws
that
at the back of the head.
you tell there's your crazy aunt who's got a conspiracy theory and keeps
Hmm.
sending you things on through messenger or whatever. But then there's the other person who says, they say this, but I don't. We all know it's crazy, but I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems crazy,
Something's
but
afoot.
I don't know.
Something's going on.
Yeah,
I
and
don't
you're
know
like,
who it is, but knock it off. Yeah.
You know, next thing
Right.
you know, the raging Nazi. Like it's just that's
Yeah.
how it, that's the weirdness of human
Yeah.
psychology.
What you just said is really fascinating because, of course, we're living through some, shall we say, interesting times. And
Yes.
there is this strange thing going on right now, which is very much like this. Okay, you get this beautiful civilization like the Silmarils, but a certain group wants to destroy it. So look out for that group. And of course, if you're rational, you're like, that's balderdash, shut up. But
Yep.
you could always have it like, well, it may not be that group, but it could be another group that wants
But
to destroy
somebody.
this beautiful thing. Somebody.
Right.
And so you get into this thing where you could fall into a slide, and the only ultimate resolution is we have to destroy the bad people,
Yeah.
whoever they are, and that's
Hmm.
definitely a fascistic place to be in.
Yep. And not
I
only them, we need to destroy even some of our own people who might be
Yes,
enabling the bad
the
guys.
enablers are the bad people, right?
Yep.
Right. And we have to force march through pain and suffering in order to destroy the bad people. Yeah,
Exactly.
I think Tolkien is such a prophet in so many ways, and this is one. He has his finger on how this strange mania comes across peoples, not just people, but peoples, whole groups of people,
Yeah.
where they
Exactly right.
begin to think this way. It's a sort of demonic possession,
It
zeitgeist.
is. That's exactly right. It's a demonic possession. I mean, this is the way, and and the way that the ancients talk about that is that's the god of that people, right? The spirit that's leading those people
Hmm.
is that. Like, how do you talk about the way that a whole people can be, a whole group of people can be animated by some demonic spirit?
Yeah,
Is just that they say, yeah, exactly. These are the people that
yeah,
are led by whomever, Anubis, I don't, whatever it is,
yes.
some god, some spirit.
The
And
infidel. There's a word here that he uses that I'm particularly intrigued in. Then Melkor lusted for the Silmarils, and the very memory of their radiance was a gnawing fire in his heart. That word lusted, that's an interesting choice of words, isn't it? Lust. Ich habe eine Lust for,
mm-hmm,
Lust or lustig is different than love. It's different even
mm-hmm.
than desire. Because it doesn't say Melkor desired the Silmarillions. A
No,
desire, love is wanting the good of the other thing and wanting it to be its own thing and letting it, flourish on its own. Desire is you want to join with that thing, you know, and to some degree that's decent, right?
I want to
But
modify that a little bit. That
good.
love also entails love necessarily entails the some sort of communing with the thing,
Ah,
but not in a dominance sort of way,
yeah,
not to
that's
dominate.
where I'm headed. That's where I'm headed.
They still want to join with it, but yeah, but
Yes. So let's see here in my little library. This is my St. Augustine's prayer book, right? That has a wonderful examination of conscience, which I won't bore you with finding right now. But in the examination of conscience, it goes through the seven deadly sins. And of course, lust being the last of the pew sago, pride, envy, wrath, sloth, avarice, gluttony, lust. In lust, it asks you one of the questions is, have you ever tortured animals or pulled the wings off of bugs? And it's like, wait, that's lust? I thought lust was all about sex, but apparently not. When it comes down to it, the old use of lust, anyway, is about
yeah,
dominance. It's about wanting to
exactly.
control the thing.
Yes, that is, and this is this is where we get into a huge shift in the because of changes in religious theology among in the Anglo-speaking and the Anglophone world. You have some
Aye,
massive radical shifts in the meaning of words in English,
aye,
and this
aye.
this is one of them. This is one of them, among others that are my favorite horse to charge into battle on.
Or
this is
flog.
this is my philology crusade. but but yeah, there's no good translation of the Bible in English. It's just
Yeah,
it's
right.
all shite. Um, because all the language that you would use for so many things, precisely because of its religious use in English, has been totally
Yeah.
hijacked, and we need to come up with new terms because it's
Yeah.
repurposed.
Yeah. Because,
Which we can
yeah.
do.
Right.
We do this all the time for all sorts of things. But lust is exactly that. It is not fundamentally sexual. It's not sexual desire. It's the desire for dominance. It's desire to
Hmm.
dominate a thing and even dissect a thing. Whether
Hmm.
you call it dissection makes it sound clean and all clean and neat
Yeah.
because you're using a Franco-derived word from thanks to the Norman invasion. But if you say pull it apart or break it into bits,
That's
that
not
sounds
so
more
fun.
crass and indelicate because it's Anglo-Saxon. But it's the point is that it's that desire to tear something
Yeah.
apart, to dominate,
Yeah.
to own, to be able to dispose of.
Yeah. When you say vivisection, it sounds like you're really highbrow and scientific. When you say slice into gobbets, that's not so fun.
That's right.
You know, yeah, it's like that thing I was talking about earlier about, the difference between bag end and cul-de-sac. They're the same word,
Good to say.
the same thing. Cul-de-sac is French for the end of the sack, and bag
Yep.
end is English for cul of the sac. But yeah, it's like, okay, let's just call a spade, right? A shovel.
Well,
And here definitely it's lust is that wanting to vivisect, to
yeah.
dissect, dominate, and I can't help but think that too. Lust has it has a connection to wanting to find out the heart of the mystery when you're not supposed to do.
Exactly. It's about oh, yeah, scrutinizing. It's about getting investigating. It's what Smagel ends up doing,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
He loved getting to the roots of things. In many ways, he's the most like the Noldor.
yeah,
He loved getting down into the mysteries and rather than beholding mysteries, untangling them at the roots
yes.
and breaking them apart. Because this is the way that kind of investigative we tend to call sort of the scientific method and all that. The way that was talked about by the ancients was equivalent to taking looking at a beautiful pearl and taking a hammer to it to break it open and see what's
Mm.
inside. Well, you've just destroyed the pearl. To break it into parts means to
Yeah.
break it into parts. Like you don't have a thing anymore.
And Gandalf even says to Saruman, it is unwise to split the light. Something like it's unwise to split the light in order to find the mystery of the thing, or something like that. After he meets
Yeah,
with Saruman, and Saruman is now Saruman of many colors.
right.
Um, I forget what the line is exactly, but it's a great line on that very same thing because Saruman is now no longer Saruman the White. He is split. He has vivisected light itself into its
Exactly. He's
parts.
dissected pure white light into these multiple different rays,
Yeah,
which is pretty, but at the end of the day, you've just broken yourself into pieces.
yeah. Yeah, and that's an interesting thing because, of course, it does raise the question, if we're not supposed to do it, or if it has such perils, why do we have this incredible desire and ability to do it? That's always plagued me. Um, is the human ability to create new things is wonderful, but there's a
Hmm.
peril. The human ability to dissect things and analyze them and understand them in that way is remarkable, but it's very
Yeah,
perilous. It's very
right.
perilous.
That was the word analysis, which literally means breaking apart.
Analysis, right?
Yep.
Analysis. Yeah, the Greek lysis, cutting apart, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I mean, once you cut apart the sparrow, you might understand it, but you don't have a sparrow anymore. You
That's
know,
exactly right.
it's got a pile of guts.
Hmm.
Uh, well, I mean, Melkor's lust for this thing is what ends up splitting not just the the Noldor, but it ends up splitting really the whole connection to the divinities.
Yeah,
The connection to the divine.
right. And it's this fracture that runs through all these different relationships. The Noldor are split among themselves.
Yep.
They start to get suspicious of the Valar. Feanor gets suspicious of his brother Fingolfin.
Yep.
Right, the lies come to him that your brother's plotting to steal the primogeniture from you, basically.
Mm.
Um, and ultimately we see the fracturing comes in between the fracturing of body and soul of the Teleri, who are slaughtered
Yeah.
wholesale because the Noldor get so wedded to their cause of vengeance again. Morgoth did us wrong, and so we're gonna go over to the shores, steal the boats, and we're gonna slay the Teleri, who've done nothing but simply say, maybe you guys shouldn't do that. Uh, Kill them. Absolute bloodbath of the Teleri who
Yeah,
dwell by
that's
the
what's
shores
awful.
because you're so wed to your cause
Yeah.
and you justify it with because there was a grievance, a great evil happened to you. No, I mean this happened. There are whole nations of people that do this. Like we see this played out throughout history. We see this playing out right now.
Yep.
That
We sure
same
do.
trap.
Yep. Yes, it's a tragic, awful thing. And I've seen it.
Absolutely.
I've seen it, well, close friends.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's an awful thing when it does
One-to-one
happen
personal
because, of course,
relationships, people will do this.
yes, and you can't reason with
No.
that kind of mentality because, of course, if you are reasoning with it, then you're the enemy. One of the things I wanted to look at too in the text, which you just mentioned a second ago, was this bit of where they begin, where the unrest begins. I like that word, unrest.
Mm-hmm.
It's not even the fractioning of the Noldor. He chooses his word very importantly. Unrest is a very Anglo-Saxon thing to do, is to take that
Unrest.
put it in front of a
Yeah.
word, and it's the opposite of the word.
God love it.
So they're not at
Unrest.
rest anymore. Okay, they're not at
Yeah.
rest, which is the whole point of the Val. The Valar brought them there in order that they might have rest, in order that they might be
Exactly.
free of Melkor. But it says here, blah blah blah. Thus, ere the Valar were aware, the peace of Valinor was poisoned, and the
Yes.
Noldor began to murmur against them, and many became filled with pride, forgetting how much of what they had and knew came to them in gift from the Valar. This is a great section there because it's not that they have a purpose or that they do something terribly wrong. It's that this beginning this churning of pride and this churning of forgetting where the things come from that are really important. And the Valar, it says, are not even aware that it's happening. It's just like
Mm-hmm.
happening.
Mm-hmm.
So startlingly enough, you suddenly have, as you said, this anger not just at the Valar but at one another as well. Feanor and Fingolfin beginning to disagree with one another. So
Right. Each suspicious of the other. And what's interesting is so it doesn't come concomitant with the introduction of um, you know, gem craft directly, but it follows on the suspicion that Melkor begins to speak to them of weapons, and the Noldor begin, so that they grow in suspicion.
yeah,
The lies start to spread. He says to these guys over here, "Hey, that group's getting, they're good at plotting against you." He says to these guys over here, "Hey, that group's plotting against you." And he gets them going, and he says, "Hey, let me show you how to make metal into a weapon."
yes, right, the crafting of weapons. Yeah, yep,
And they make swords and
yes,
axes and spears, and they start showing shields to each other. We're gonna wear shields just to show that we're
huh.
defended.
And is that where the crests of the families come from? Maybe.
It's exactly what he directly explicitly mentions that.
Huh.
He says that they made shields displaying the tokens of many houses and kindreds that vied with one with another, and these only they wore abroad. And these only they wore abroad. The other weapons they did not speak. So they kept their assault weapons in secret because you don't want anyone else to see that. But you're just going to start wearing shields that display your family arms, your tokens of your clan over other clans. And so we're going to start a propaganda war. It's going to be an Instagram war
Yep.
first, and then it's knives out.
It was Neil Postman, I think, who said that in our new electronic world, we're not going to be more united. We're going to actually become more tribal.
Yes.
And I've pondered that phrase for quite some time. One of the aspects I think that he meant was this very thing, is to begin falling into our tribes. You're not part of
Mm-hmm.
our tribe. You don't have the right color hair. You know, and I'm going to
And
fight
these
you. Why? Because you're
and these
not part of my tribe.
exactly, and there, we say tribalism, and it's just kind of like talking to Galadriel about magic and magic. What the elves do and what the Dark Lord does. Tribe
Hmm.
or clan can be your kin group. There's a positive way of talking about it. We seem to use the same word, not tribalism, as a bad thing, But we're really talking about a very different phenomena because it's not just divisions along kin group lines. It's often fragmentations within kin groups that these new tribes, these it's almost like they're false tribes, right? If you
Mm,
want to think about it that way, tribalism is like the 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 perverse false version of a family group,
yes.
right? It's root. It's supposed to be a family group, right? That's what gens is. People who are genead from the same sort. People are born from the same,
Family.
like
Yeah.
nation. Nation means people born from the same parents.
Yeah.
But here you've got brother against brother. You've got so it's factionalism, right? We call it
Oh,
tribalism, but I think
yeah.
factionalism is maybe a better thing, so as not to just besmirch legitimate family group things, which generally,
Mm,
harmonious. When it's working well, things that are well, if we get birds of a feather flocking together, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. It's when you get
yeah.
factions in there, and that's what's interesting. Is you look at it, don't this doesn't show up in canonical biblical literature as much, but when you look at the things that aren't part of canon in most, at least definitely in the Western churches, but I think you do actually get an Ethiopian church, and maybe the Russians have it too. I don't know, but some of these other accounts of the early generations of humanity, you get a lot more of this. They give, when the various heavenly powers, gods, if you will, give certain kinds of technology, uh, particularly metallurgy, musical instruments and weapons, uh, to the people, they start to factionalize against one another. And so you start to get this. It goes hand in hand with that. There was something you said. I've lost grip of exactly what it was now,
Hmm.
but the idea that it goes hand in hand. So what he's showing here is this thing that's observed. Tolkien is not only predict. Oh, was a Neil Postman reference.
Yeah.
With the new technology, we get greater tribalism, factionalism. That's simply observing the applicability into the near future, the present indeed, of what was observed about humanity for even 4 or 5 thousand years ago, 6,000 years ago. That from the beginning, you get along with a proliferation of tools, you get greater factionalism.
Yes. Yes.
Why is that?
And well, this is something I've been pondering a great deal since I've been studying the eugenics movement too. Um, the eugenicists really were at the core in the 19th century and early 20th century of splitting people into these gens, these tribes, these groups. And I don't know if it was a thing before that. From what I've read, it doesn't seem to have been a thing before that. And so even the history that we have, which is written basically under the shadow of the eugenicist thing, might to some degree be tainted. When we look back at ancient human beings, I'm not saying that they all lived in peace and harmony with each other because they probably didn't, knowing human nature.
Right.
But to think that, like, say, Karl Marx, who would suggest that the struggles between humans is between the haves and the have-nots, and it's always been that way, that puts a color to how we view human history.
Yeah.
Did ancient tribes look at that group over there that had, say, metallurgy and say, we want that, and we're going to kill you to take it? Is that the root and cause of all the fighting that we've ever had in human history? It's almost as though to talk about this text for a minute in its historical context, it's almost as though Tolkien is suggesting that the Marxian idea or the geneticist, the eugenicist idea is not really correct. That this is rather the fighting between humans, elves,
Mhm.
is not something that comes from haves and have-nots. It's that the pride or desire or lust um, for those that have is itself a demonic source. It comes from a demonic uh, dis, unrest. That's the word.
Right.
It's a demonic unrest.
Right. It's exactly that. It's an unrest, a diabolical, which is to say, again, to split your will in half, diabolane, to split your intentions, is is just that. It is. We're so conditioned to reading history through a semi-Marxian semi. I mean, it's a whole hodgepodge of
Yes.
Adam Smith liberalism and Marx, stuff, like things that are incompatible philosophical systems kind of make up the eclecticism of how we tend to think the world is if we went through modern Western education in the last 100
Yep.
years, um, which everybody alive today did, so that's that. But when you
God
read
help us.
ancient texts and they propose causes for these things, or they write in a way, you realize that this, at least whether this is right or wrong, it's certainly not the only explanation. And
Yes.
Tolkien is offering us, I think you're exactly right. You're absolutely right. Tolkien is offering us another alternative explanation, because here you've got, it's not have-nots overthrowing those who have. It's not even really those who have are somehow dominating and lording it over those that don't.
No,
It's
no.
There's a fissure. It's more, what is it? Was it Dostoevsky or Solzhenitsyn, or both, because it's to say the same thing, that the fissure runs right through every human heart,
Yes.
right? That it's this thing that it originates in. Here, it's not in a material cause, but it's
Yeah.
in the lie, the half believing of a lie, the suspicion against brother. I mean, that's the ancient Syria, Near Eastern account of the fratricide of the Cain and Abel type story.
Hmm.
The primal fratricide is it's a suspicion and envy. Even Ramus and Remus, it's not this guy has something I want to have. It's they usually most of these stories are not quabbling specifically over some bit of territory or some potential mate, but rather envy.
That's
God,
interesting. Yes.
the gods have favored you and not me, or I get the
Yeah.
suspicion somebody whispered in my ear like Puck to Othello, whatever the
Yeah.
Puck character in that play, he said this, you should smother your wife. What? And so he does it.
Yeah.
It's a suspicion and an envy. Remembering that envy, again, the English language shift. Envy doesn't mean jealousy. I want what you have. Envy means I'm suspicious of you, and I don't like I don't like that you get good things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I don't
Mm-hmm.
necessarily want the thing. I just want bad for you.
Because everything that Melkor says in this chapter is half true. That's an interesting thing to note, is half
Exactly right.
true. There's a point in here where he notices that they're beginning to have that unrest, and he actually stokes the flames, and he says, to Fingolfin and Finarfin, it was said, and I like the passive voice used there. That's really interesting. It
It was
was said, right? To Fingolfin and Finarfin, it was said, beware, small love has the proud son of Miriel ever had for the children of Indus. Now he has become great, and he has his father in his hand. It will not be long before he drives you forth from Tuna. There's a
Mhm.
half truth in there. It's basically that Feanor, the son of Miriel, um, does hold himself separate from Fingolfin and Finarfin. Is
Mm.
that Feanor is of another mother? Is that Feanor has become great to a certain extent? All those are half truths. And if he plants that in the mind of these guys, suddenly they're not like, oh, I want the Silmaril. It's, hmm, maybe I'm not maybe I'm going to be driven out of Tuna. Maybe my life is going to be in jeopardy. Maybe I have to do something right now. And so there's this fear that comes up with the jealousy or the envy or whatever it is. It's fear for their own people and their own safety, but
Yeah,
splits even further the people's.
right. It's like a fear of missing out, except instead of applied to not getting there before the sale ends, it's applied to not getting to make the first blow. You're afraid that
Right.
somebody will slap you, so you go around slapping everybody else to
Yeah.
maintain
Yeah.
your interest in the world.
So the thing here is not that there's a desire for the Silmarils, is that the Silmarils end up being sort of like the focal point for what happens afterwards, which is the planting of fear and envy in the various characters here that make them terrified that they're going to lose out and they have to take action right now. It's like, act now and you'll get this too. Um,
Exactly. And in fact, that's really, really interesting. They become the focal point of the, where is it? Even as Mandos. Why is it Mandos who prophesied this? But Mandos prophesied that the Silmarils would be essentially the whole fate of all the elements, earth, wind,
Yes.
air, and fire, would be bound up with the Silmarils. And
Yes.
it's absolutely true. And we've alluded to this in the last episode too, the idea that, well, there's a Silmaril is the star of Earendil, right?
Yeah.
The most beloved star of the elves, and that has a great power in Lord of the Rings. There's the possibility that there's at least a symbolic connection between the Silmaril that's cast into the fires of the bowels of the earth and the Arkenstone onto the mountain for the Hobbit. But you're right. It's not the whole story isn't the quest for the Silmarils and everybody killing each other over them. The whole thing is we're all daggers at each other's throats
Yeah.
about and basically any issue we can find. And it's all suspicion, even when the dwarves are introduced, right? There's the elves and the dwarves, and all of that, as we'll see. But the Silmarils almost become because so they're hallowed, they're made blessed. They become, in a good way for those who are well intentioned, in a perverse way, as opposed for those who are ill intentioned. This locus of salvation. They become a
Mm.
focalizing point that
Mm.
if only, if you are the sons of Feanor, so the sons of Feanor swear an oath that anybody touches the Silmarils, we're going to kill them, right? That's it. Anybody stands in between us and the Silmarils, it's, that's it, curtains for you, and that we're going to shred you into curtains. But so for anybody who's not the sons of Feanor, they say if we could just get rid of the Silmarils, become the focal point. If we could just get rid of the Silmarils, if we possess the Silmarils, if the sons of Feanor just got the Silmarils, maybe they don't leave us alone.
Yeah.
And for the Sons of Feanor, it's hey, if we have the Silmarils, everything will be okay, right? You don't got to worry about it. And in every case, they become the main things. Melkor ends up getting one,
Hmm.
and Thranduil says to Beren, "Okay, fine, you can marry my daughter if you go snatch a Silmaril off of Melkor's, crown." Well, Beren and Luthien, of course, all go off and do just that, but that ends up plunging the whole kingdom of Thranduil into destruction as the dwarves begin to lust after the Silmaril. And he hires them, and he's suspicious of them, and they're suspicious of him. But it's not, in many ways, it's not the Silmaril's fault, right? But
No.
it's the fact it just happens to be on the scene for
Yeah.
all these major events, all these major conflicts. Yeah, I was gonna say,
Okay.
could be seen as finally as we can see them as causing it, or we can see them as simply accompanying, right? Because they bear the light of the stars, the light of the light of the trees, and they are like
Yeah.
stars. In the same way, the
I.
sun shining on every battle doesn't mean that it causes the battle. It's just there, just nonetheless.
Mm. Yeah, and that's a good argument to make. I would make the argument that they might actually be to some degree causing it in this way. If we go back to the description of the Silmarils for just a minute
Hmm.
and take a look at them, I want to make a point about this. It says, as three great jewels they were in form, so three, which is a significant number. Again, we parse that later, but not
Right.
blah 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 blah
Three
blah.
jewels, one light.
Right. Like the crystals of diamonds, it appeared, and yet was more strong than adamant, so that no violence could mar it or break it within the kingdom of Arda, meaning all three of the jewels. Yet that crystal was to the Silmarils, but as is the body to the children of Iluvatar, the house of its inner fire, that is within it, and yet in all parts of it, and is its life. And the inner fire of the Silmarils, Feanor made of the blended light of the trees of Valinor, which lives in them yet, though the trees have long withered and shine no more. Therefore, even in the darkness of the deepest treasury, the Silmarils of their own radiance shone like the stars of Varda. And all who dwelt in Aman were filled with wonder and delight at the work of Feanor. So what he's describing is this is like almost an egg-shaped jewel that has in it this light, this living light, like the stars, and is surpassing beautiful and brooks no evil. The evil itself gets burned when it gets close to it. But my thought on it is what he creates, for all intents and purposes, is a little world. It's a little universe. In other words,
Hmm.
Feanor takes on the role of Iluvatar, and he creates for the first time another smaller world within the world of Middle Earth. And as far as that goes, it becomes causative because everybody else sees this and like, you didn't just make a jewel. You've done something that raises you to the level of Iluvatar. And I didn't. And now you have power and majesty and greatness greater than I. And You're just like me. I knew you when you put your diapers on. I knew you when you were a little
Hmm.
elflet. Um, and you are not infallible, but you have all this power, and it scares me. And I worry about you, and I worry about what you're going to do. So I need to make weapons against you.
Right.
So in that way, it's causative. In that way, it's like, had he not done this, had he not made this little world, none of that chain reaction
Right.
stuff would have occurred.
Right. No, that's true. That's true in that they preceded it. But I think it's very interesting that you touched on that idea that this is a miniature world, a secondary world, which
Hmm.
is, of course, Tolkien's code for himself of the world of a story that an author creates is a
Yes.
secondary world, and that's just flowing on the what is Feanor's famous for the Silmarils. What was he doing before then? He was improving writing, and
Huh.
he
Yeah.
he improved the letter system. He didn't invent the
Like
letter system
like the Oxford Dictionary.
like a certain Oxford, yeah, a certain Dawn I know of.
Oh
And
man.
creates these three gems. You know, thankfully Tolkien never created three stories as a triplet together. That
Yeah,
was
that
just
would be rough.
modifying.
That'd be tough. And then nobody could get near him. I mean, he'd have so much power by that point. We'd have to do something ourselves and I don't know,
Yeah,
make our own video series or something
we'd well, yeah, and
to arm
we'd have to
ourselves.
run it down and talk about how it's secretly racist or something like that, and not fascist stuff. Because
Just
don't you know,
hypothetically.
all of a sudden, it's very meta, but the work creates the very phenomenon that it writes about. Uh,
Wow. Yes.
yeah, that's cool. We are living in the unrest of the Noldor, my friend.
Yeah, no, I think so. I think there's actually something to that. All jesting aside, I think there's something to that.
Yeah, it's
Um,
Silmarils all the way down.
it is Silmarils all the way down. Yeah.
But is that this comes to a point with the first drawing of the sword,
Yeah.
brother
Yeah.
against brother,
Yeah.
and so things, this strife, this suspicion builds up to the point where eventually Fingolfin goes before Finwë, his father, and says, nobody going to stop him. Your son. He intercedes to his father with the appropriate authority to talk about the pride of my brother Curfinwë, who's called the Spirit of Fire. And all too truly, he's promised. So sorry, back up a step. Feanor, aka Curfinwë, right, as he's known in the family. They call him Mitch, but everybody else knows him as whatever. But but Feanor has started to proclaim openly against the Valar.
Yeah.
He's imbibed the lies of Melkor, and he says, "Follow me, Noldor. Hearken to me. I will free you from. I will liberate you from thraldom if you follow
Yeah.
me." Now, what is a thrall? A thrall is somebody who is possessed by somebody else, right? You are
Mm.
merely property, right? You're enthralled by something. You're under a bond or contract of ownership, which is
Yeah.
precise. Like, yes, okay, so that's the lie that Melkor is saying is true of the elves vis-a-vis the Valar. But
Yeah.
thrall is the result of lust, right? Something is enthralled
Yes.
to you. It's your thrall if you've dominated it to have your way with it, which is precisely what Melkor wants to do. So there's an irony to the
Yep.
fact that they are becoming thralls of Melkor, whilst thinking that that is the path of liberation if they go and they cut off the heads of all the Valar.
And not to play my Dungeons and Dragons geek card, but it's also a term that's used for vampires. Vampires have thralls. The
Yes,
thrall is a human that has been bitten by the vampire and now does the will of the vampire. So that's
that's right.
that's the suggestion therein. It's like you need to demand reparations, right? Because you've been nothing but a thrall. You've been um, you know, not empowered. You need to be
Yeah,
empowered.
yeah,
Which, as
exactly.
Tolkien rightly points out, is complete lie,
Yeah, that's
but
exactly right. And
dangerous.
it leads. So he starts proclaiming this. Fingolfin says, "This is nuts. It's gone too far. I'm going to go talk to Dad." And he's talking to Dad, and Feanor walks in right at that moment and says, "Oh,
Yeah.
I see." And he draws his sword on his brother.
Yeah.
And that's the first, the pivotal, I think we can't help but cheapen that moment in our imaginations because we see people. Actually, I don't know when the last you and I are in a special class. To answer the question, when was the last time you saw somebody draw a sword on somebody else? It was there last week. Majority of people. The majority of people. When was the last time you saw somebody draw a sword? No, not really. But figuratively, I mean, we see guns and violence all the time. It's the chosen swords for the day. But but this is the first time, not only that the weapon has been drawn against another person, nobody else has seen someone else have a weapon, right? It's like he pulls it out of his cloak immediately, out of nowhere. This is the first death threat. There has been no violence yet among the elves, no murder, no. There's only been suspicion. We've been starting to carry shields around, but this is the first. This is the first weapon that's been revealed. And it's revealed point against his brother within a family in their own home.
Yeah, and not just holding it up, but I mean, the whole thing says the point of his bright sword he set against Fingolfin's breast. So this is like, hey, guess what? I'm going to stab your chest here, your throat, or whatever it is. And then he says something interesting too. He says, "This is sharper than thy tongue." You might have, in other words, you might have all the talk and the reason and the words and all this. I carry a bigger stick. Or in this case, a sword, right?
Exactly right.
Violence trumps logic and reason.
Yeah. Yep. The sword is sharper than words.
Than the pen. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a dangerous place to be in. Before we conclude here, I was reminded of this poem by Carl Sandburg about all this, which I've always loved this poem since I was a boy, and I read it in this book called Silver Pennies. And this is called Primer Lesson by Carl Sandburg. He says, "Look out how you use proud words. When you let proud words go, it is not easy to call them back. They wear long boots, hard boots. They walk off proud. They can't hear you calling. Look out how you use proud words."
Yeah.
I love that. It really gets to the heart of this thing. It's like you not just say, but do proud things, and then you can't call it back. And you have to do more and more and more. It kind of like snowballs. And suddenly you're pointing the sword at the chest of somebody that should be your friend and brother.
Right.
Was that a place to stop?
I think that's the place to stop. We'll pick up there with the next episode.
All right, brother. We'll do that then. Farewell wherever you fare. To your areas receive you at your journey's end.
And may the wind under your wings bear you to where the sun sails and the moon walks.
Come on, do it.
You look like you're in a sunny position. Is that a sunny world you're in right now?
Like it just keeps foom, 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 foom.
Dang.
Let me try. I don't know what is up with the There we go. Okay, good. Now you're like this way and not that way.
Ah,
Determined.
was it flipping?
Strange. Yes. Um, but sometimes you come across podcasts, people just talking about stuff, and you know
Mhm.
beyond a shadow of a doubt that they're dead wrong. You know, they're wrong. What do you
Yeah,
do about it? I mean, you can't be like, hey, actually, you know,
I at them on every social media channel. That's what you do, Will. See,
playing the
there's
let's look on
some
down about
British journalists, I
everything.
think, use the term keyboard tigers. Just tick, 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 for like
People
angry
angry.
people.
I
Because I
like
don't I
that.
don't know that that's a thing, but it might catch on.
I like that. It's good. I like it. So what they were saying
Hmm.
was they were talking about it was really he was trying to do a whole thing about Lord of the Rings and going through a almost moot like an Entmoot level scrutiny of the work, very slow. Like who would tackle the work that size slowly? It's like going through the Silmarillion very slowly or something. Like what idiot would do that?
What kind of idiot
Um,
is that?
anyway, he brought up this idea about bag in, about the word bag in, and where does bag in come from? And he was saying that it's saying cul-de-sac in a less graceful way.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, it is, isn't it?
yeah, but no, I mean it's actually Anglo-Saxon for cul-de-sac. Cul-de-sac is the French, and Anglo-Saxon is the bag in. That's all it is. So why do
Yep.
we, the whole conception that somehow Anglo-Saxon is a less graceful way of doing things?
Because the Battle of Hastings, my friend.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
I mean,
I
that's
was reading about that fat fellow the other day, and he was really William of Normandy. He was a pretty brutal son of a gun. No,
what I
um,
understand. Yeah,
apparently he broke no rebellion after he invaded, and he would often go around the countryside just terrorizing people just for the hell of it. And he
yeah.
several times he just took out whole villages, like everybody, men, women,
Wow,
chickens, dogs, just wiped them out. So,
wow,
I mean, he wasn't just some like, "Hi, I'm here. I'm the new boss." Same as the old boss. No,
hmm,
he was a vicious son of a gun.
wow.
Um, yeah, and in the same article, they were saying he got so fat at the end of his life from luxurious living that he eventually fell off his horse, I guess, and they broke his back or something like that, and they couldn't lift him, and so he died. And then when they tried to get him into his coffin, he wouldn't fit into his coffin, and so they're like shoving him in, and his stomach burst.
Oh no.
Yeah, and so they rammed him in basically with poles finally to get him into this coffin. What ignominious. What'd you do to your life? Oh, I conquered England and then get shoved into
All's
my
well that ends well.
thing.
Try and get my hands in a comfortable position here to hold the phone.
Oh, do you not have a tripod?
No,
Oh my man, you got to invest in a tripod. Here, this thing,
I should.
this thing, see right here.
Like the self-reflective technology, all of a sudden it's
Yes, yes, you need it.
I
Yes, you
do.
definitely need it.
That would be good.
As you continue in this electronic disaster that we call the modern world, you need these little bits here,
I mean,
earphones, and
need the bit.
tripods, and all that. You need the bits.
How I learned to stop worrying and love the bomb.
Yeah, Yahoo!
Uh, so yeah.
So okay. So any time you wanna launch it, go ahead. Feel free to
Okay.
go ahead and launch it.
All right. All right.